You've seen the headlines, right? Some massive company makes billions in profit but pays almost nothing in taxes. And you're probably thinking, wait, how is that even legal? Well, today we are going to pull back the curtain on that very question.
Yeah, it's a question that gets a lot of people, pretty fired up. And the answer, and this is key, it's not really about illegal tax evasion. It's all about understanding the super complex and honestly often confusing rulebook that is the corporate tax code.
Okay, and this right here is probably the single most important concept we have to get our heads around. Someone on an economics forum, a CPA, they just nailed it. They said there's a huge difference between the profit a company shows to its investors and the profit it shows to the tax man. That gap, that's where this whole story lives.
All right, so how do they do it? How do companies legally shrink that taxable income? Well, it's not magic. It's more like a toolbox filled with very specific financial strategies. So let's go ahead and open up that toolbox.
Okay, the first big tool in the box is called profit shifting. And honestly, it's pretty much what it sounds like. Just imagine this. A company makes $100 million in, say, Germany, where taxes are pretty high. Profit shifting is the art of legally moving that profit, just on paper, to a subsidiary in a place like Bermuda, where the tax rate is 0. And they do it before that German tax bill ever gets calculated. So where do all these profits get shifted to? Well, they often land in a place called a tax haven. And according to big organizations that study this stuff, these aren't just places with low taxes. That's part of it, for sure. But they also have these other key things in common. A whole lot of secrecy, not much transparency, and, this is a big one, no real requirement that a company actually does any business there.
But how, practically, do they move the money? A really common way is by setting up something called a holding company in one of those tax havens. The best way to think of it is like a central mailbox. All the profits from sales in those high-tax countries, they get sent, quote-unquote, to this mailbox in the low-tax country. And just like that, the company's total tax bill drops dramatically.
Okay, so we've seen the tools, right? The how-to. But now, let's follow the data and see what the real-world impact is. I mean, what does this profit shifting actually look like on a global scale? All right, get ready for this because the numbers here are, well, they're almost hard to believe. One report found that in just a single year, U.S. companies reported $600 billion in profits from just 7 small tax-friendly countries. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. That's over $500 billion. To put that into perspective, that means a full 50%, half of all the foreign profits reported by U.S. multinational companies were booked in just that tiny handful of places. Which, of course, raises the obvious question, right? If half the profit is there, does that mean half the factories are there, half the salespeople? Is half of the actual business happening in those 7 little countries?
And here is the kicker. This is where it gets really wild. While those same countries have half the profits, they're home to only 5% of the employees and just 11% of the physical property, the factories and offices. The profits are there on paper, but the real business, that's happening somewhere else entirely.
So this is the crucial point. The money is ending up in one place, but the people in the buildings that actually generate that money are somewhere else completely. This mismatch, that's like the statistical fingerprint of profit shifting.
And look, this isn't a new trick. As the economy went global, and especially as it went digital, the use of these foreign holding companies just exploded. It went from being this kind of niche strategy back in the 80s to accounting for nearly half of all foreign investment by 2013. It's basically become standard operating procedure.
So as you can imagine, all this evidence, this really clear disconnect between where the profits are and where the work is done, it has ignited a massive global debate. Governments are arguing about fairness, about competition, and about what on earth to do about a system that allows this to happen.
Now, here's something that might actually surprise you. A former top tax official from the OECD pointed out that this is almost all perfectly legal. The companies are just doing their job, planning their taxes. They're playing by the rules of the game. So the whole global debate isn't about catching cheaters, it's about changing the actual rules of the game itself.
At its heart, the debate really boils down to 2 totally different philosophies. First, you have the worldwide system. This says if you're a U.S. company, you should pay U.S. taxes on profits you make anywhere, even in Ireland. Then you have the territorial system. That says you should only pay U.S. taxes on the profits you make inside the U.S. As you can imagine, each approach has huge consequences, and most countries kind of use a mix of both.
So what are the main solutions people are talking about? Well, there are 4 big ideas on the table.
The first one is a global minimum tax, so companies can't just find a zero-tax country anymore. The second is to change the rules to tie profits to where a company's actual sales and employees are. A third option is to just strengthen the existing anti-abuse rules. And finally, there's the argument to just lower domestic tax rates so there's less reason to move profits in the first place.
And because this is a truly global problem, the main effort to fix it has to be global too. It's this big project called BEPS that stands for Base Erosion and Profit Shifting. It's being coordinated by the OECD, which is basically a club for the world's developed economies. And they're all trying to get on the same page and agree on a new set of rules.
All right, so after following the money and digging into this huge global debate, where does that leave us? Let's recap what we've learned from our little investigation into this billion-dollar tax question.
Okay, so here's what we know. We've seen that companies are using totally legal tools like profit shifting and holding companies. We've seen the hard data showing this huge disconnect between where profits get reported and where the actual business gets done. And we now know this whole situation has triggered a really complex international effort to fix a system that's been decades in the making.
And all of this leaves us with the central, massive challenge that governments all over the world are wrestling with. In a world of global companies, how do you design a tax system that feels fair to all of us, the citizens, but also stays competitive enough for businesses to thrive? Finding that perfect balance between those two things, well, that really is the billion-dollar question that's still waiting for an answer.